and have heard in the past that there are transponder codes that pilots can send if an aircraft is hijacked. From what I understand, we didn't get some of that yet, so we have to assume that the cockpits were burst into rather quickly. And I heard Judy Woodruff and others earlier infer, and I join them in drawing the same inference, that it's highly doubtful that the pilots of these aircraft, the United Airlines pilots and the American Airline pilots, were at the controls of these aircraft when they impacted their targets. So we have got to assume and infer that people capable of flying the aircraft, and remember these aircraft are on duty all over the world, these perpetrators no doubt rehearsed this operation, rehearsed breaking into the cockpit and other locations, that they were probably piloted to the target by people capable of flying a military or a jet aircraft.
Well, do you think, I mean, I have to interrupt you to ask, do you think that perhaps in looking at the possibility of terror threats, I mean, certainly terror threats have come to this country in the past, and I'm wondering if you think perhaps we were thinking too high concept. We thought of something more elaborate, and perhaps intelligence should have been focused on this kind of low-tech approach. I suppose hindsight is 20/20, but
I think there's a lot of good in what you're pointing out, Joey. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You know, we cannot just focus all our energies on weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, etc. We've all been talking about that, and hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on that in recent years. But this didn't use any weapon of mass destruction, and I'm afraid that the casualty tally could approach 5 figures. And that means that we've got to beat these people, not only high tech, but we've got to be high concept. It means we've got to work harder in planning than we have up to this point. And I know that we will. And if I could say a word about the people at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, we've had the privilege in my company to work to support both organizations. We've trained every security officer at both locations. They knew what they were up against. They knew that they were icons, American icons, that were likely to be targeted. Excuse me, it's been an emotional day, plus it's a little hot out here. Likely to be targeted. And they did their best. But they were only one part of a system, as we've just outlined. You know, Doug Karpiloff, the Director of Life Safety and Security for the World Trade Center, is probably one of the premier security people in our country. Doug was always afraid of a scenario where there was a mass casualty incident at the World Trade Center and hundreds of emergency vehicles would rush to the scene. They don't have the ability to check all those vehicles to make sure that they don't pose a threat. So we're yet to determine, we've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
Mr. Beatty, we appreciate all of your insight. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave you. There are still further developments on this story. Jeffrey Beatty's company is involved in counterterrorism information, and he joined us this afternoon from Dallas. Now let's go back to New York for the latest information there in Aaron Brown.
Joey, thank you. A couple of things. The president is en route back to Washington, we are now told. The president had started his day in Sarasota, Florida, then went to Shreveport, a military base outside Shreveport, then went to Nebraska, where the Strategic Air Command is located, and now he is making his way back to Washington. And we are told the president will address the nation at some point tonight. We do not know at what time, but of course, when it happens, we will carry that live as well. We're also getting reports that a second building in the complex of the Trade Center, and again, you have the 2 towers, but then you have a number of support buildings around it, that another of those buildings, we reported a bit ago on Building 7, we now report that there are problems in Building 5, and that may be collapsing as well, but at least there is fire there. There are enormous logistical problems. We just looked down what is 8th Avenue behind us here, which is normally at this time of the day packed with cars. This is rush hour, people trying to get out of the city. It is empty, and the city, in at least this part of the city, Manhattan, is shut down, which means that thousands of people who are trying to get home, trying to get to the suburbs, trying to get to Long Island, trying to get to New Jersey particularly, that's where those trains